Hey everyone, here we are. Welcome to Exposing Truth Radio. Bill Ottman here with Ian Crossland, and I think we're expecting Grant Cameron of Presidential UFO. Ian there?
I am here.
Are you ready to talk about this?
I'm excited.
All right, this website is pretty great. It has this list of quotes of president and high political figures talking about UFOs. So I guess I'll just get started with some of these quotes because they're pretty interesting. So to start off, Jimmy Carter, who actually I think he claims to have seen UFOs, and that during his administration he would open up as much information as he could. I think he kind of got stonewalled, but he did do a lot of stuff with the Freedom of Information Act. And here's one quote. I think it is impossible, in my opinion, some people disagree, to have space people from other planets or stars. Oh, wait, so this is saying it's not possible. But then he's also said, I don't see any reason to keep information like that secret, but there may be some aspects of the UFO information which I'm not familiar with that might be related to some secret experiments that we were doing that involve national security or weapon systems. I certainly wouldn't release that. So there's obviously this big rift between figuring out, are these military craft that people are seeing? Probably, in a lot of cases, yes. Or is there actually some otherworldly phenomena going on?
God, who knows, man? Well, there's stars shining in our atmosphere, so that's extraterrestrial light. I mean, I don't see why we couldn't have, like, refractions and shit, even, like, planned refractions from, like, you know, a distant sentient spotlight across the streams and cause us to see something or something.
I mean, you just mean like an optical illusion?
Well, I mean, like if someone was trying to communicate with us through patterns, they might use light because it travels fast. So a way to really amplify those patterns would be to have two of the same beams of light, like two beams of light with the same wavelength overlapping. It would cause what's called coherent, I believe it's called constructive interference. It's a kind of interference that actually amplifies it. So, you know, I could see if they were firing the same thing at us from like 60 different spots. That's a way to maybe really show something up.
Right. Yeah. I mean, communicating through light is definitely. I mean, that seems to be what's happening in a lot of cases. All sorts of atmospheric phenomena. I mean, some of the videos that you see they could almost be like holographic projections. They look like morphing holograms. That's honestly what they look like, and they jump around the sky and you know, all sorts of weird fractal patterns inside them. But then other stuff like the Phoenix Lights, which, you know, hundreds and thousands of people saw, including the governor of Arizona, who openly talks about it and wants disclosure on it. You know, that was like a triangular shaped craft with huge lights that was just hovering over Phoenix for like hours. So there's different things that are happening.
So with the Phoenix Lights, that could have been a bunch of balloons, right?
No. People are very sure the way that it was moving across the sky, and that there was an actual craft between the lights. I mean, you can see you can see the craft. It's not just flares or balloons. Like there's a form between the lights.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone's going to build a big hovercraft, it would probably be out in the desert somewhere.
Yeah. And then actually a photo that we posted yesterday was an actual NASA photo. I think you saw it from the International Space Station, where there's a black triangle in the image. These are two NASA photos from like the late 80s. And someone who saw that we posted that actually contacted NASA and asked them about it, and they got back to her. They said, I could probably find, they basically said it was space debris, which is an easy thing to say, and, you know, of course that's what they would say. And that may be true, but it may also not be. I mean, there's this one guy who was an image analyst at NASA, Dr. Ken Johnston, I think is his name. He basically says that there's all sorts of image modification going on and that he firsthand witnessed it. I forget which Apollo flight it was, but, you know, you can look up his testimony on this. It's, you know, all over the web. But he said that he walked into a room after some Apollo mission, and these image, graphic people were, you know, on this light board with all the old film reels on the table, and they were actually modifying the images, and they said that they were blacking out the stars. But, you know, he first viewed the images and saw these craters with huge domes inside on the backside of the moon. And, you know, everybody was freaking out about it. And then it went to another meeting a few days later, or some amount of time later, and, you know, they were showing the images to a much larger group of people, and the domes within the craters were gone. And, you know, so he basically is, and he has copies of these images. So he thinks that, you know, that's what they were doing. They were doctoring the images. They didn't want it to get out. It's hard to know what to think.
Right.
I mean, when you have NASA doctors, you know, high level, you know, director of image analysis from Apollo missions saying that there's cover-up going on with this media, I mean, how do you respond to that?
Well, it makes me think that, you know, that some agency has been to the moon without telling people and has planted some sort of dome on it, or he just saw something that he thought he saw that maybe wasn't actually there. It's, you know. Right.
Yeah, I think sorry.
Well, arguably, I mean, anything could have put it there. I don't know why a non-human would have been on our moon. It's possible. I just would hope they would have said hello on the way.
Well, some people
maybe they didn't realize.
Some people would say that they have communicated
in different ways than English language
and said hello. Well, who knows? I mean, there's plenty of, you know, supposed contactees who claim to.
You know, it's interesting too, because as people get busy, you just don't pay as much attention to the little like comments and stuff, and so maybe to a giant galactic race, they're so busy that our reaction didn't really matter. You know, they didn't like hang around to get us to be like, hey, back at you. They just were like, and then continued.
Right. Yeah, I'm just, you know, fascinated by the fact that there's obviously tons of disinformation out there, but there's also a pretty high-level dialogue going on in between government officials about all of this stuff. I mean, I heard Obama make mention, well, two things about it. One, Will Smith and his son were on a tour of the White House. And, you know, this is just a funny story. I don't think it really means too much. But Will Smith said, there's an interview of this somewhere, said his son was like, wanted to ask Obama about aliens. You know, obviously Will Smith's son, he was in Independence Day. I'm sure that they have all sorts of ideas about that. But Obama knew that's what he wanted to ask, Will Smith said, and was like tugging on his pants, and Obama says, well, let me guess, want to know about the aliens? And he said, well, what I can say is that I can neither confirm nor deny that this is happening, and that if it was happening, it would be happening, if there were talks about this happening, it would be happening right here in this room, where they were in like the situation room or something like that. But, it was a pretty vague statement about it. And then, what was the... So, yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I don't know if, it's just, okay, I don't know whether to believe the government, whatever that even means, government statements through their space agency or whatever. Like, if they say they have seen it, like, why would they say that? Why would they hide it in the first place? And then what would they get from telling me that? And then on the flip side, if they've never seen it, what would they get from telling me that they have versus not saying that they haven't? I mean, do they say openly, we have never contacted any extraterrestrial life?
No, not really. I mean, there isn't really a they. There's all different government officials are saying a lot of different stuff. I mean, Bill Richardson and John Podesta, I think he was chief of staff. They want disclosure. I think there's actually hundreds of military officials who have testified in things like the Disclosure Project and other stuff at the National Press Club, explaining their experiences, pilots who have, confronted huge craft. So there's no shortage of testimony. It's definitely happening. It's just mostly a matter of what it is and who's really behind it.
I got to wonder, you think there's like a deficit, there's billions of dollars a year going into like construction and research of spacecraft?
Yeah, I think the black budget is far greater than we can really understand.
How big is the black budget?
That's a good question. I wouldn't be able to put a number to it, but billions at least, not more.
Do you have any links to anything on the black budget?
Yeah, well, if you just search, I talked about this a little last show, but there's this book called Blank Spots on Map that talks about the amount of information that is classified, and some huge percentage of history is actually classified. And I'll look as the show goes on for like a good budget link.
I guess that would be an argument as to why they don't want to, say what exactly your tax dollars go for, because they're going for things that they don't tell people exist.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how it would be disruptive, I mean, that seems pretty clear. If disclosure, or when there's disclosure, because we know the documents are there, we know that they're just not releasing them. Other governments have released them, and there are actually a bunch of great documents that have been released in the U.S. that are pretty clear evidence of something going on. Richard Dolan's work, I really respect. He has a book called UFOs and the National Security State, and another book called After Disclosure. And he goes through the documents. And, that's what everybody, I think, really appreciates from the ET disclosure world, rather than this hearsay. They just want the documents.
Is the document just a statement that was made by some guy that said he was there?
No, the documents are military documents of correspondence and of proof of actual events occurring.
Can't they forge a document?
Yeah, sure.
But you think it would be illogical for them to forge a document and then classify it?
Well, if you look at a case like Rendlesham Forest or Bentwaters, there's many officials who went and saw this craft landed on the ground, and it was like pulsating, and there were a bunch of them who saw it, and they have it all written in their, their military logs. And now a lot of these guys are some of the guys testifying for disclosure on what actually happened. And, they want the world to know. So some of these veterans are huge, huge disclosure activists now. So It's pretty funny. Okay, Aaron just says the black budget is said to be $1.25 trillion a year for all black budget, said Philip Schneider. And he said there are 129 deep underground bases.
Whoa.
So that's an estimate. Who knows what the actual number is, but I've seen some Philip Schneider videos a couple of years ago. I have to go back and check those out.
He says 129 underground bases?
Yeah. I mean,
in the United States?
Yeah.
Jeez.
And those ultimately turn into cities. So, you underground cities. What was Jesse Ventura, the former governor of Minnesota and the ex-wrestler, and, huge disclosure informationist. He did an episode of his show all about Ozarks, and they're at this underground facility. They actually do get into this huge tunnel system, and all the people in the town, if you look at Ozarks, Ozarks, the people in the town complain of earthquakes because of the drilling that's going on. I mean, have you seen those drills that actually drill the tunnels? Like the size of huge transportation trucks, and the drill is literally like 20 feet tall and like hundreds of feet long. Just like huge. So,
God, do you have a link or a link to a picture or a video of that?
If you just look up, just search Ozarks and Jesse J. Ventura. Aaron just sent a quote. The black budget is a secretive budget that garners 25% of the gross national products of the United States. The black budget currently consumes $1.25 trillion per year. At least this amount is used in black programs like those concerned with deep underground military bases. Presently, there are 129. Okay, so that's the exact quote of Philip Schneider. Where are you getting that quote from, Aaron? If you could just let me know.
I want to look at the Ozarks.
Yeah, his series is really good. I mean, it's definitely sensationalized a little bit.
Jesse.
Yeah, but he also published a really cool book, something like 63 documents the government doesn't want you to see. Huge 9/11 truth activist. I mean, even Judge Napolitano and guys on Fox News have come out about 9/11, but that's as far as it goes. I remember Geraldo Rivera, did some of the biggest hit pieces against 9/11 truth, and then he later had some 9/11 family members on and was featuring all this information about why Building 7 collapsed. We're not really sure, and it doesn't seem like we're getting answers for it. So he completely flip-flopped. Judge Napolitano, I've seen him interviewing Jesse Ventura on Fox Business, talking about Building 7. And so basically, I had a friend the other day who, we were talking about 9/11, and, you and I live in the city, so it's kind of always in the periphery. But he was saying how it's clear, everyone knows, but people don't want to dig because they're afraid of what would happen to the U.S. if that came out and it was, went to court and stuff. What do you think would happen to the United States if, our legal system brought this information out 100%?
The people would gain a large amount of power.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like if you find out that one of your parents has been cheating on your other parent. The power shift that you would have as a kid, or whatever.
Right. It's almost like a collective psychological edge that we would have.
Yeah, they'd be at our mercy because we prison them and execute them, the people that were involved in that.
Right. But I think ultimately the world globally would respect us more if we used our legal system to cleanse ourselves and purge. And, this applies to, financial systems and financial corruption. Those people aren't getting prosecuted or held accountable. Basically, we don't hold people accountable for much. Even the only people that get held accountable are like the workers and the small-time drug dealers, getting thrown in jail for years, yet the intelligence agency drug trafficking just goes on.
I would be willing to pardon everyone involved in all this stuff if disclosure comes out. That's
a really interesting idea, and I wrote an article about that way back in the day. That hey, we just want to know. Let's go on a forgiveness principle, and we'll work out something fair. We're not going to kill you all. We're not going to put everybody to death. There's just there has to be something reasonable, because there's so many people who are involved that it would be weird if, I don't know what the proper punishment is, but I think it has to be lenient. Otherwise, it just seems like it's never going to happen.
Well, I agree, because we could talk about a full-scale revolution on the radio. It's like, is that wise? I mean, it's not. We're allowed to talk about full-scale revolution as per the First Amendment. We're supposed to consider full-on military armed revolution against government and Congress, surround the White House, surround Congress, and make them bow to our demands and instill a new government. That's the whole point of the people, is if they really want to do that, they won't stop themselves. But I think you're right. I think definitely a disclosure and a forgiveness route would work for everybody, because the argument there is dishinging the system. I don't want to just make it so we stub our toe or go flying off the horse. Taking everyone out of power that's fucked up might not be the best thing.
Right.
But then I guess taking a gun out of a crazy person's hand is a good thing. So. Well,
I think taking people out of power, that probably has to happen. It's a question of whether they're going to go to jail for a very, very long time. All right, but we got to take a break, so we'll be right back.
You're listening to A2Zen FM, life-altering talk radio. Anything from activism to Zen and everything in between, right here and now. Informative, inspiring, engaging. Our hosts provide you with the global news and educated advice you need to make a difference in your life, in your world. Knowledge is power. A2Zen.fm.
Exposing the Truth Radio intends to be as open and uncensored as possible. Freedom to express unpopular views is key to global evolution. Everything we post and allow posted is not necessarily reflective of the absolute truth, nor do we endorse every word or every piece of media here. Having stated this, we seek to post and broadcast highly accurate information from alternative, mainstream, and fringe sources. Remember to listen to Exposing the Truth Radio, and you decide.
This broadcast is not the views or opinions of A2Zen.fm, nor any of the hosts here at A2Zen.fm radio and magazine. To contact Aaron, go to Facebook, Exposing the Truth, or exposingthetruth.info. Now let's get back to our hosts on Exposing the Truth, here on A2Zen.fm.
Hey, welcome back. Ian and Bill here.
What's
up? We're talking on some otherworldly phenomena right here. I'm just going to read a quick stream of quotes, and then, Ian, I want to hear what your thoughts are. Okay, Henry Kissinger said this: The subject is the biggest hot potato of all time. Bobby Kennedy said this: "If it were desirable to hold congressional hearings on the question of unidentified flying objects, I would certainly agree that they should be open to the public." Let's see some more here. Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas and 2008 Republican candidate. He says, "I believe in GOD, not UFO." Let's see. Einstein talking to President Truman about the shoot-down order of UFOs flying over Washington, D.C. on July 19th, 1952. Mr. President, anyone who can come across millions of miles of space will be able to take care of themselves. Get there. Don't start something you can't finish. So those are pretty interesting.
What did he say? What was the first part of Einstein's quote?
He says, "Mr. President, anyone who can cross millions of miles of space will be able to take care of themselves when they get there. Don't start something you can't finish."
What is that in regards to?
Well, there was a shoot-down order on UFOs through President Truman, a military shoot. Like, they have all sorts of protocol for these kinds of things. Like, they have procedures that they follow. There are manuals about it.
So what was that Bobby Kennedy quote?
Oh, he was just saying that the investigation should be open to the public.
He phrased it a certain way. What was it?
If it were desirable to hold congressional hearings on the question of unidentified flying objects, I would certainly agree that they should be open to the public. It's kind of
is that just something?
It's a very political statement. If it were desirable to hold congressional hearings.
Right. So, like, does Congress not even discuss it?
Not in hearings, no. Here's a Bill Clinton quote that's as quoted by senior White House reporter Sarah McClendon in reply to why he wasn't doing anything about UFO disclosure. Bill Clinton says, "Sarah, there's a government inside the government, and I don't control it."
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is, the whole shadow government has been talked about since Teddy Roosevelt. There's a really cool Teddy Roosevelt quote talking about the invisible government.
Yeah, they must have been involved in the American Revolution. I'm sorry, were you going to say the Teddy Roosevelt quote just then?
Oh, no. Wait, who?
Like, they must have, in the American Revolution, this government, these what are they, Bavarian royalty, I guess is whatever you want to call them, where they come from, but do you think they must have been involved somehow? I mean, it was the bankers, right?
Right.
They were, the banking cartels, they must have been heavily involved in the American Revolution.
Oh, yeah, somebody has to fund it.
Who was the first notably corrupted U.S. president?
I don't know, man. I mean, there would have to be probably some corruption in every administration, but I don't want to go into territory that I don't really know the facts of what I'm talking about.
I'm interested in really examining the Constitution for corruption. I've noticed a little bit of it.
I sat in on a really interesting lecture at Columbia today, and it was at the law school, and they were talking about, it was Professor Moglen, who's just brilliant, and we were talking about law and how there's the Constitution, but the gist of the talk was basically saying that there isn't law. What there is people making decisions. So you have judges who make decisions, and they're not making decisions based on the law 100% of the time. They're interpreting it, and based on who they are, they're making decisions. So what legally the best strategy for a lawyer is to, be able to predict what that person making the decision is going to say. Yes, there's value in upholding human rights and in the Constitution, but really be a good lawyer, you have to know what people are going to do.
That's interesting. So, to anticipate judges' predisposition,
Mm-hmm.
and then you already have something ready for a way to get around what that would be?
Yeah.
That's the way to do it. Yeah, fuck. Law. I mean...
There are many levels of law.
Yeah, Plato said, unless you're something like the downfall of not being involved in the government is that you're going to be led by your inferiors. Not being involved in politics, I think he said. Just people changing the law, and they are really changing it. I mean, they are going after it all year, every year, with interests. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's always going to be interest involved. All right, I'm going to rail off a few more quotes here. Bill Clinton was really involved in it. I mean, the Clintons both were. There's a cool picture of Hillary Clinton hanging out with Lawrence Rockefeller, who spearheaded a huge, it's called the Rockefeller Initiative, and it was a huge investigation, private investigation into UFOs. Not private as in not in a government investigation. But there's a photo of her holding this book that was identified as, a well-known UFO book. And it's just the elephant in the room. I like that Kissinger quote. It's the biggest hot potato of all time. Everybody's just avoiding it. And everybody's avoiding all these different questions. So, I don't like to claim to know the truth about any of these issues. But the point is that we have to talk about it in a public and official setting.
That's true. Yeah, I agree. So you literally walk, like set appointments and ask the questions? Or have people on the show and ask the questions?
Well, yeah, through media, that's one path, but that's been done. That's been done for decades. There's so many notable figures have gotten on the radio and gotten on TV shows and said incredible statements about what is actually going on, but it just seems to get ignored. There's no political or policy reform business.
I think that what has to be done is someone's got to fucking smuggle a camera in and release the footage at their own risk for people to believe it. It could be written out. I saw a giant spaceship yesterday, and people will just dismiss it. And then I guess as video editing is getting better, it's going to be easier to dismiss what you see on video. But if someone's like, oh my God.
Hey,
I'm surprised nothing with Wiki. Oh, what's that?
No, sorry. Are you there? Aaron was just saying, yeah, I think somebody's calling in, our guest. But
awesome.
So anyway, sorry, what were you saying?
Well, it surprises me with all this WikiLeaks info released that not a lot of UFO stuff came out. Admittedly, I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. There have, I think that people in government are probably very conscious of, especially the email they're sending, on what servers they're sending those emails. I mean, if you're in the loop on the real information about that kind of stuff, then and you're sending emails through your official email, I mean, you're an idiot.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's like its own internet that they use. Do you agree with me?
Oh, yeah, there's definitely dark nets for that kind of communication. But hey, if you were going to be a kind of subtle whistleblower, maybe what you would do is just send something on the server that you know is going to get exposed eventually.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Grant, are you here? Well, it seems like he can't. He's not unmuted yet. Aaron, if you could unmute Grant, that'd be great. So I'm just going to read off a couple more quotes while we wait for Grant Cameron to chime in here. And let's see. Hello?
Yep. Can you?
Hey, yeah,
hey, Grant.
Yeah, a little choppy. Welcome, Grant.
How you doing?
Excellent.
Good.
All right, glad we got you aboard. So, everyone, welcome Grant Cameron from presidentialufo.com. All right, Grant, we've been talking UFOs for the past half hour. What's on your immediate radar? What's current?
What's current? You guys seem to be quite up on the president stuff there. You have all the quotes down and seem to have a pretty good awareness of what's happened with the presidents. Right now, I have a book coming out Monday, and it's called UFOs, Area 51, and Government Informants. It's a book that was originally published in 1991. It was the first book published by MUFON. And I've updated it, put all sorts of new, exciting stuff in it. And it's coming out Monday or Tuesday. And so I'll be doing Coast to Coast Sunday night with George Knapp. And we'll be going through the whole stuff that was in there. Nothing presidential. The presidential book I'm still working on, but this is a book that deals with the Canadian government involvement in the early 1950s. The involvement of Dr. Eric Walker, which was it's a pretty important story, which a lot of people in ufology don't know. And then I go into the MJ-12 document with Bill Moore, follow all those documents, the Avery, the birds, and we go into Ronald Pandolfi, who the New York Times called the top scientist in the CIA, his involvement with UFOs, that whole deal. And we get into my version of Area 51, which be interesting to see what George Knapp's got to say, because he's the guy that made it famous. And John Lear, when he saw my article that I put on my website, he said it was the best summation of the Area 51 story. And it's a bit different than everybody else tells it, but we'll see what George Knapp says on Sunday night, because he's the guy that knows all the facts. He was on the inside, and I think he'll agree with my version of what happened. But that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just trying to get this thing out. And I'm also working on what I think is the most important aspect of the UFO mystery right now, and that's consciousness. I got into this last year. I saw a lecture at UFO Congress in Phoenix, and I saw Colin Andrews' lecture on the crop circles. And he talked about the consciousness aspect of crop circles, that he believed that the aliens not only are making crop circles, they were actually also controlling the people who were hoaxing the crop circles. Produced a lot of fairly interesting evidence, and I had one of these sort of enlightenment experiences where suddenly a lot of stuff that I had researched for 30 years all just suddenly flipped into my head, and it all made sense. So I work on this lecture I'm giving at UFO Congress this year on consciousness, the connection between UFOs and consciousness, and why it is the key to understanding the whole UFO phenomenon.
Great. Yeah, I absolutely agree with the connection of consciousness, and congratulations on your book. I'm a huge fan of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and Dr. Edgar Mitchell, and, Sixth Man on the Moon, and he's a huge disclosure advocate, and that's what he says too, that the consciousness is the very core of this whole equation. So, do you think that you could give us, just so that we're not too scattered and we can kind of dive into one topic, do you think that we could, are you saving Area 51 for the Coast to Coast show?
No. I've talked about it before.
All right. Well, could you give our listeners your version of what's going on?
Okay. My version, we had it in the original book. The original book was published in 1991. It was called UFOs MJ-12 and the Government. And in that was when the story was breaking, the Lazar story. I'm pretty sure I have a tape. I actually talked to John Lear the morning after they were caught at the base. They went out 3 times to film this UFO. Bob Lazar, who of course was on the inside, had told them when the tests were being done. It was every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. And on the second night, they got a film there. The third night they got caught, Lazar, Lear, Lazar's wife, and they were caught by the security forces, and of course Lazar was exposed. And I've actually got a tape of John Lear the morning after I talked to him. So I was involved while this was going on when I was talking to George Knapp, and we were asking all these sort of real deep questions like, did you have the 115, which is supposedly the stuff that they used to propel the solder? The story was that they had put it on when the story broke. Bob Lazar came out and George Knapp made it famous. He put him on KLS TV in Las Vegas. And in one of these shots, they actually had this little canister with the 115, and they put it in the screenshot of Lazar just to show the government that they had this. And it was stolen back. But so I was involved with Lazar, I was involved with Lear, Knapp, all during this whole period. So we put the story out in 1991, and then when I'm doing the book Richard Dolan wanted to publish the book. He had used some of my material in his part 2 of UFOs in the National Security State. He asked me, could we republish the book, update it? So I started to go back over the Area 51 stuff, and we had it pretty well exact. I was looking at it, and there was really not much. So what I did is I started to review a lot of interviews that had been done in the 20 years since we had first done the story. And it was one interview that George Knapp had done with Gene Huff and John Lear that gave the cue as to what had exactly happened. Because, you see, the problem with it is that Lazar had the problem of his background. He didn't have these 2 master's degrees. So, of course, the story was he was there, he comes out, suddenly people find out he doesn't have the 2 master's degree. Everybody says this is a garbage story. They throw it on the pile of dead UFO stories, and everybody goes off and does something else, and the story basically gets out. So this re-interview of Huff and Lear takes place, and I sort of took it that everybody's telling the truth. What would happen if Lazar was telling the truth? Because he passed 4 lie detector tests, and Lear and Huff and Knapp and all these people. There must be something that fits all these people telling the truth. And it comes to this interview, and John Lear tells the story. He said he had contacted, as you know the story, Lazar had met Edward Teller in 1982 at Los Alamos. Teller was there lecturing. He runs into him. He sort of talks to him about. He's on the front page of the newspaper with this Honda with a jet engine in it, and him and Teller correspond talk back and forth. He leaves it, and he gets in contact with John Lear in 1988 through. I won't get into that story, but he gets in contact with him, and Lear tells him, "Go out. Why don't you go up and work on the test site?" So he decides he wants to get back into science. He's working at a film laboratory there, and he's this film laboratory. So he decides he's going to phone up Teller. He phones up Teller. This is in November of 1988, and Teller says, "Well, where do you want to work? Do you want to work at Livermore, where Teller was running the Livermore labs up in California, or do you want to work in Las Vegas?" So Lazar says, "I want to work up at the test site in Las Vegas." He gets a call. He goes to EG&G to do these interviews, and this is the key part that tells the whole story. They have 3 interviews. Lazar comes back and he tells John, he said, "I aced the interviews, no problem. It was all technical questions. I absolutely aced the interviews. The only question that wasn't a technical question was the first question of the second interview. The question to Lazar by the EG&G people who are hiring him to go up to the base is, what do you know about, do you know John Lear? Relationship with John Lear, and what do you think of him?" And Lazar says, "Yes, I know him, and I think he sticks his nose where it doesn't belong." So this means that before Lazar ever went up to the test site, they knew that he was in contact with John Lear. And if you remember back, I don't know how long you've been in ufology. I was there when this happened. At the time, this is 1988, 1989, John Lear was already famous because he'd been on base. He'd actually got a picture of a MiG-21 on the base in front of a hangar, which is actually in the special projects. They actually have it hanging on the wall, this picture that showed that the Americans had captured a MiG. So he was known to the people on the base. He was very prominent because his father owned the Lear jet. He had all these, he'd flown for the CIA, had all these licenses, and had become interested in UFOs in 1987. He had run into somebody who was involved with the Rendlesham Forest thing, so he got into the UFO thing, and he was very interested, and he started to put out papers. And because he was a famous guy, everybody in the UFO community was listening to John Lear, and he was putting out the Bill Cooper stuff, and the Dulce Base, and the Battle of Dulce Base, and the aliens are going to eat us, and John was putting out all this stuff, and he was very famous, and everybody, I remember back then, everybody, the Lear briefing, and all this stuff was going around, it was all circulating around, so he was very prominent, and he was also the Fund State Director for Nevada. And the other thing that you have to put into perspective in this whole story is that 1989, when Lazar actually goes public in March of 1989, in 1989, they hold the MUFON conference in Las Vegas. And John Lear is in charge of the MUFON conference, the National MUFON conference, for that year in 1989. And he picks all the speakers, and he wants Bill Cooper, and he wants Bill English and all these people, and MUFON says, nope, we don't want these crazy people, we're going to pick the speakers. And John holds a counter conference to the MUFON conference. And at that major conference in 1989, just after this happened, Bill Moore makes his famous speech. And part of the book that I'm doing is on Bill Moore. I knew Bill Moore very well, and I actually state what was going on behind the scenes with Bill Moore. Bill Moore makes this famous speech in 1989, just as the Lazar story is breaking, about the fact that he's been working for the government and the Falcon and the Condor and all different bird things and what was going on there. The other thing you got to keep in perspective to understand what happened at Area 51 was that in October of 1988, this is about a couple days before the election, before the Reagan leaves office. This is only a couple of weeks before Lazar goes up to the site. There is a documentary that was put on Fox TV. It was called UFO Cover-Up Live. People want to go. It's on YouTube. I would highly advise people to read it. In the book, I talk about a little bit about this. There's actually a book in this that I'm really going to get more into this. This was complete CIA. Everything. This was a major leak by the U.S. government. It's called UFO Cover-Up Live. It was broadcast October 14th, I think, of 1988, just shortly before Lazar went up there. And in that documentary, this is before Lazar ever goes public, you will see, they show a flow chart, MJ Tall flow chart inside the government, and they show the remote viewing program run by DIA, which wouldn't become declassified until 1995. They show Area 51 as being part. They show a lot of stuff that wouldn't become public till later. So if you understand this whole thing, you get to the scenario that before Lazar went to Area 51, they knew that he was connected with John Lear. And I may do a lecture and I talk about the fact that I believe the government is leaking stuff. And what they did was they took Lazar, they realized he had a bad background, and they moved him up to the site. Now, his background was jet engines. He had built a jet engine and had it in this Honda that he used to drive around Las Vegas. Up at the test site, they have, 5,000 people working at the test site. The vast majority of the stuff up at the test site is engines. It's drones and stealth, and there's a lot of rocket technology. Do they put Lazar up to work on the rocket technology where there's 5,000 people? No, they put him to S4, where there's only like 24 people working, and they make up this story. Some guy got killed in an explosion there, and they need this guy. They move him to S4 when he really doesn't have any background for this. They stick him in there, and they know that he knows John Lear. If you listen to the story, I put it in the book, he goes up there on December the 6th, 1988. That almost day he goes up there, he goes back and tells John Lear. He goes into John Lear's house, and I've been in John Lear's house. He goes, John, I was up at the base, and I saw a saucer. And John said, is it theirs or ours? He said, it's theirs. And John said, well, what are you doing here? Wait, they'll be following you. Why don't you work up at the base for a couple of months and then come back and tell me what's going on? And he says, no, John, you took a lot of crap over this, and I want you to know about this. Now, Huff, in the interview, adds into this, and he says that Lazar told him that part of his job while he was working up there was to report to security people at S4 what John Lear was doing, what John Lear was believing. So the whole time, they knew that all this stuff was going back to John Lear. And John Lear was doing all this, the aliens are eating us and all this crazy stuff. And he's a very honest, straight shooter, but he had these bizarre things that he believed in 1988. And what they wanted people to know that there was stuff going on at the base. So they give it to Lazar, who has a bad background, and once he comes out, it's like a trap door. Once he starts to talk, the UFO community is going to pick up that his background is bad. They're going to dump the story, and the story is going to get out that they've got crafts at Area 51, and that the story will die, but it will still get out that they have stuff there. What they didn't calculate, and it was supposed to go to John Lear, and John Lear would spread this stuff around, and that's what they wanted. They wanted out. Same as a couple months before, they had made these disclosures on UFO Cover-Up Live, and there's a lot of disclosures they made on this show that I won't really get into. But so they're making these disclosures. Now, what they didn't calculate was George Knapp. George Knapp started a 6 to 8 month investigation on this whole thing, and they didn't realize he put Lazar on this program with this assumed identity, Dennis, who was Lazar's boss at S4. So they put him in background. You can't see his face. And they put this thing, and it just goes viral around the world. Everybody's picking up on this. Suddenly you have buses going up to Area 51. Everybody's trying to look in on this thing. And the story starts to die because people realize that Lazar's got a bad background, but they can't control the story. They actually, in a couple of years after the thing broke, they actually had to take more land so that the people couldn't get up into the hills to look over Area 51. It just got totally out of control. They actually had to move the stuff, all the test stuff from the base to another area because it was sort of something that, like in normal stuff where they drop stuff into the UFO community, it gets dropped. Like, for example, the Chase Brandon story, which I talk about in the book.
Right. That dropped, but Area 51 certainly didn't drop. Okay, so they're leaking it intentionally.
Yes.
What is that how you think it's going to continue to go, or is there going to be a breaking point where there's some sort of official disclosure? I mean, what do you feel the long-term disclosure strategy is?
Delay. Just keep doing what they're doing. They're doing it constantly. I mean, the Chase Brandon story, which just broke, is classic story of some guy 35 years in the CIA, 10 years as the second most powerful spokesman for the CIA. He had office on the 7th floor outside the director's office. This guy was extremely powerful. He walks out and throws the CIA under the bus and says, "Oh, I saw a Roswell box. The CIA had this information. I saw it." And we go after the CIA. We try to get the CIA to comment on this. They do make a comment and say we can't confirm what he saw. And the story dies. And who's gone after the story? It just died. Take a look at Lee Spiegel, who did the story. He, in the first couple of days at Huffington Post when he did that story, he got 1.5 million hits. He had another meeting with Chase Brandon. Chase Brandon was coming to New York. He said, "We'll get together for beer." Lee Spiegel brings his tape recorder along. They sit down. He says, "Let's do a follow-up interview." Chase Brandon's all upset about how the stories come out and how he's being played in the media and how big this thing has become. And so he says, "Well, let's do a follow-up interview. You can say." He said, "No, I don't want to do a follow-up interview." And there was no interview. Chase Brandon walked off into the shadows of the night, has never talked about it again, and this whole story about the CIA on the 65th anniversary of the Roswell thing comes out that they're confirming Roswell. They do it. You have a guy, the head scientist for the CIA, his name is Ronald Pandolfi. This guy has been leaking stuff since 1991.
Right. Hey, Grant, this is amazing info, and we're so happy to have you. The show's about to end. Thank you so much for coming. Let's do it again soon, and we'll keep getting this out there. Cheers.
Good.
All right. Ian, thanks for joining us, and
it's been fantastic.
We'll see you all next time.
Thank you, Grant.
Thank you.